back to the Gamble Smart channel. Hope you guys are doing well out there. All right, we're gonna talk again about how slot machines actually work. This is a part 2 updated version of a video we did about 1.5 years ago. We got a lot of new information to dump on you guys, and we're gonna go into a little bit more detail than we did previously because we've been getting a lot of questions over the last year. I've been compiling them, and we're gonna do a one-stop shop video here that answers all of those for you guys. So this is gonna be a really good video to reference and send to your friends if they've ever wanted to know how all this stuff works. So what are we gonna talk about? We're gonna talk about RNGs, random number generators. We're gonna get real deep into it about how they actually work. How truly random are they? Okay, we're gonna talk about payback percentages. What does the casino have control over when it comes to slot machines? How do they make sure that they're gonna make money, right? Can that really be truly random or not? We're gonna talk about that. We're also gonna talk about the different types of bonus rounds, hold and spin, regular free spins, things like that, types of progressives. We're gonna cover Class 2 and Class 3 gaming. And then one of the things that I really like talking about is some of the manipulation tactics that slot machine manufacturers use in their games to make you continue to play and get trapped into thinking that you are gonna win. So we're gonna talk about all that. And then finally, at the very end, after I dump all this information on you, we're gonna talk about how it actually matters to you and what are the things that you should be doing when you walk into a casino and start playing these things, okay? Strap in, gonna be a long video, but a lot of useful information. If you wanna skip over certain parts, you can certainly do that. We've got chapter markers down below. Guys, let's get going. All right, guys, let's jump on in and start talking about RNGs, random number generators. If you've been playing slots long enough, you have no doubt heard this term, but what does it really mean exactly? So let's break it down. So the reason RNGs exist with slot machines is to make sure that future outcomes are completely unpredictable by us humans, okay? That is the reason it exists. But really, let's break it down so you understand what it's actually coming from. So the only way to generate true randomness is mostly in nature, where a lightning bolt strikes, things like that, okay? If you program a computer to be random, it's not RNG, it's called pseudo RNG, or you might have heard PRNG, because somebody actually had to write computer code to tell the computer to generate randomness, okay? So it's not truly random. Funny enough, there's actually a company out there called Cloudflare, and the way that they generate randomness is they have a room filled with lava lamps and they have cameras on each one of them because lava lamps are unpredictable. There's no human that is telling how big the bubbles are going to be, etc., right? But we can't put 50 lava lamps inside of a slot machine, so we have to do something else, and that is create a pseudo random number generator. So how is this done exactly? Well, there are several methods to generate a pseudo random number, but the most common way is to basically start with a seed value. And a seed value is an initial value that it starts to generate sequences off of, okay? So in theory, if you knew that initial seed value, then you could predict the future outcomes of a PRNG, or a pseudo random number. But since we don't know the seed value, it's unpredictable for us, okay? Now, to take a different level to this, because if the seed value got out, in theory, people could then figure out future outcomes of a slot machine. So whenever the machine first turns on, it starts the RNG up, and the way that it figures out that seed value is different every single time the machine is turned on. It takes the exact time and date, microsecond. It might multiply it by a voltage reading on the batteries or power supply inside of the cabinet. It'll then multiply it by a serial number that's on certain components in the cabinet. It's going to be generating something random every single time the machine is turned on, so that the seed value is unpredictable, thus making the pseudo random number generator unpredictable. Have I lost most of you by now? I know it's very geeky, but we do get these questions, and so I think it's important to break it down. But what does this really mean to us, as slot players? Is it random enough? Yes, it is, okay? And there are actually 2 labs that exist outside of slot manufacturers, outside of casinos, gaming commissions and all this, GLI and BMM test labs. And what they do is essentially take these algorithms produced by slot manufacturers for their RNGs and run them through a ton of tests. And they do this continuously to make sure that, number 1, cannot predict future outcomes of that RNG. Number 2, that it's secure. There's no way for somebody to determine that initial seed value. And number three, that it is fair and honest, okay? That they're not putting any kind of weights or code inside of there to say, okay, on this time and date at a specific time, if you press the spin button, you're gonna get a jackpot. They test all that. They see the raw code developed by these manufacturers and make sure that there's no funny business going on. Okay, so these guys have to sign off on it before it can ever end up in one of these slot machines, all right? So that's what the random number generator is. Its entire purpose is to ensure that future outcomes are not predictable by us, okay? Let's move on. All right, so I know what you're saying. Okay, you just told me that future outcomes are unpredictable, but how is it that a casino can make sure that it's making money off of that slot machine if it's truly random? That's the catch. It is not truly random. The only random aspect of a slot machine spin is not knowing what's coming next, but there is a control in place, okay? The control is what ensures that the casino gets whatever their hold percentage is on that game that they've set it to, okay? Think about a deck of cards, okay? 52 deck of cards, you shuffle it, you pick out a card at random. That is a random event, right? Nobody knew what you were gonna pick out. You didn't even know. If you shuffled it well, you had no idea what card you're gonna pick out. But the control of that is that it had to be one of those 52 cards, right? It couldn't be a card that doesn't exist. So that's the control. And now every single one of those cards represent a different probability or a different outcome. Let's look at just a real strip, real simple here. So if you're looking at this, think of this as the control. The random number generator is picking a certain symbol. Now I'm simplifying this, but it's picking a certain symbol on here. And then the reel moves, and then that's what you see. What do you think is the most weighted, meaning that most likely thing to occur when the random number generator picks something? A blank, right? That's why you see blanks all the time on the 3 reels. I know you don't see blanks on like the video style slots, but you see low paying symbols, things like that. So there's a heavy weight to low paying, like double bars, a single bar, blanks, things like that. It's much more likely that the random number generator is gonna pick those than the 7s or the wilds, things like that. Does that make sense? So that's how they control it. So what actually goes into the making of a game? So whenever a slot manufacturer wants to create a new game, the math has to be generated on the back end. And the math is the operation ensuring that over time, all the probabilities will play out in a way that whatever payback percentage that casino wants to set that machine to will come to fruition, okay? That means that if they set it to 90%, which means 90% for the players, 10% hold for them, all the money that goes into it, then they set the probabilities such that on this, that I just showed you, that it will result in that over millions and millions of spins. If it doesn't come up with that, well, then they'll put the weights differently on here. They may put a little bit stronger weights on the double bar if it's too low. And that means that the RNG is more likely to pick the double bar more often over time, and that will result in the payback percentage to you, the player, to increase. Make sense? I hope that makes sense. All right, let's move on to the next topic, which is about the actual payback percentage and what it means to you. All right, let's talk about payback percentage. This is probably one of the things that everybody gets really confused about, but I've actually created a little tool that you can use, and I'll show you here in a second, that'll help kind of make you understand what's going on here. So a payback percentage setting on a slot machine is something that the casino can set. Now the slot manufacturers give them a range, usually from 83% on the low up to around 98% on the high. Different games vary. There could be anywhere from 3 to 10 different settings that they can pick from, okay? Now these payback percentages essentially is the control that we just talked about. The control saying that over millions of spins, if let's say it's set at 90%, which is the national average by the way, 90% of all the money going into that slot machine is going to be paid back to the players. Maybe not you individually, but to the players as a whole. And 10% of that is going to go to the house, which is the casino. Now, let's say $1 million is put through a slot machine over time, right? 900,000 of that is going to get paid back. 100,000 of that is going to go to the house. Now multiply that by the thousands of machines some of these casinos have, and you see the math, right? They're making tons of money off of these things, even at a 10% hold, right? So here's the thing. Here's what I think you really should pay attention to and understand. Payback percentage is not something that you can feel or notice in the short term. So even a machine set very low at 83% can produce some outstanding results in the short term. It's possible, right? So just because you play a machine for 5 spins, 10 spins, 20, 100, even 1,000, you're not going to be able to tell where that payback percentage is on that machine. Now, if you played it hundreds of thousands of times, it's the same machine that you've been playing for 10 years, yeah, you'll be able to tell. But in the short term, you're not going to be able to tell. All right, so how can I actually prove this to you? So I created this program that basically will simulate a certain number of spins on a very simplistic slot machine and tell you the results, what the RTP is going to be. So let's take a look at that now. This is a good way to kind of represent what's going on with payback percentage, right? It's called the law of large numbers. The probability theory states that over time, it will reach that 90% or whatever this payback percentage is on that machine that was set. It will happen, okay? And they do a lot of tests to make sure that it does happen, but it's not something that's gonna happen in the short term. In the short term, it could be all over the place. The machine could be paying 20% or 180%. Within the first 100 spins or something. You don't know. That's payback percentage. Try not to get all fixed up on that. You don't know what it is. If you did know, let's just say this. Let's say you did know. You had a slot tech friend that worked and he told you what all the payback percentages were on the casino floor. Should you play the one that's the highest? Absolutely, okay? Absolutely. But there's no way you can detect this if you don't know. And so we feel strongly that you're just wasting your time. You're not gonna notice anything there. All right, let's move on. All right, so we talked about RTP. Now the other side of that is volatility. And out of those two, the one thing that you can detect is the volatility within 100, 200, 500 spins, something like that. And this is something that you really should be paying attention to. So we think ignore RTP, look for volatility. All right, what is it exactly? So think about it this way. Whenever slot manufacturers come together and say, let's create a new game, they have to decide how volatile they want the game to be. Even though the payback percentage is the same, let's say it's set at 90%, the way two different games get there can be quite different. One of them might be like this, or another one is a little more like this. But at the end, they will still reach that 90%. But they get to decide how volatile they want a specific game to be. Is it gonna be one of those that the bonus hits very frequently, but the bonus rounds are 15, 20 credits, nothing big, but you have that frequency of bonus, right? Or they crank the bonus frequency way up where it's really hard to get, 200 spins or whatever, but if you do get it, it's generally very good, right? And you've probably noticed this in the slot machines that you've played. You will start to learn that some games it's really difficult to get the bonus on, but once you get it, it's pretty good. Like you're about to lock in a decent win, right? But the other side of that is the low volatility, which you're giving up those gigantic bonus rounds and potentials for gigantic hits and progresses and stuff like that for something that's a little bit slower and steadier, right? So there's some benefits to both, right? Let's talk about it. The low volatility games, the benefit is that you will generally last longer, right? It's a little less risky of you playing low volatility games, right? But you're really giving up those chances of getting some really gigantic hits, right? And that's something that you have to decide. Now, one of the other benefits of playing a low volatility game is because you can last longer on a game, in theory, you can generate more comps because you're playing a type of game that just gives you enough to keep, longevity in your play. And that is important when it comes to comp generation. Now, on the other side, the high volatility games, some people love these, right? We don't personally love them, but it's one of those that you can get incredibly lucky within the first couple spins and walk away a gigantic winner. And if you're willing to put that risk on the line, then play a higher volatility game. But here's the trap, and this is the negative side of high volatility in our opinion. And that is, of all the games, all the slot machine games that are on the casino floor, the one type is a high volatility game, and that is going to get you to chase more than a low volatility game will, right? Because you will start to get invested. You'll feel that feeling of being invested in that game because you've put $300 in and you haven't gotten the bonus round. If I can just get the bonus round, then maybe I'll get my 300 bucks back and I'll get out. But it doesn't always work out that way. And on those style games, it's intentionally doing that. If you think about a game that it takes very long time to get the bonus, you are more likely to chase on that game than one that comes very frequently, right? It's just psychology. So try to think about that a little bit before you decide which type of game you're going to play. So how do you know the volatility of the game? Well, if you wanted to play it, you could spin it 200 or 300 times and kind of get a general idea of how frequent the bonus rounds hit, how frequent the line hits hit, what they actually pay, things like that. Sometimes you can actually go into the game rules and take a look there to kind of see what do you get for 5 of a kinds or 3 of a kinds, things like that. But here's our suggestion, is to watch somebody else play. I'm not talking about be a stalker inside of the casino where you're standing behind somebody just staring at them, because that makes them nervous, and you know, we don't need that. But YouTube's a powerful thing. Take a look there. Watch people play it. But make sure you look for the ones where they're showing the long version of the play. Don't just click on the ones that say massive huff and puff bonus and that's all it shows you, right? Because then you're not getting the full picture of the volatility of the game. You're just seeing the bonus potential, and that could be dangerous. So look for the ones, especially the ones that go live, because if they sit at a game for 15, 20 minutes and they play it live, you're gonna get a good indication of what the feeling is of that game, how frequent the bonus rounds come around, etc. And that's a good way to learn the volatility of the game before you even have to put any money on the line. So we highly recommend doing that. Learn the game first, because guys, I'm here to tell you, not all slot machines are created equal. Even though they have that same 90% in theory payback percentage, it doesn't mean that they're gonna play exactly the same to get to that 90%. Some are gonna be gigantic wins, but very rarely does anybody win that, right? High volatility. All right, let's move on. All right, so let's talk about the 2 different types of progressives that you could find on a casino floor. So the first is what I call a normal progressive, and this is probably 90% of what you see. The other 10% are the must hit by progressives. So let's tackle those first. So must hit by will clearly be defined as such, either on the progressive meter, which is where you see the numbers climbing up. It will say must win by in a certain amount, or it might be in the game rules. And that means that as that meter grows, as the money grows inside of that progressive, it has to hit before it reaches a certain number. It's a guaranteed that it will hit before it reaches that ceiling, right? So there is some advantage play components to this, where you can take a look at something that is very close to the top. Let's say it's a must win by 10,000 and it's at 9,998. It's gonna go off very, very soon. Now, you're never gonna find one because there's probably somebody already sitting there playing it if it's that high. But that does give you an indication that it must hit before it hits that 10,000. So what is the slot mechanics there? Like, how does it actually work? So if it's a must hit by, whenever it's reset or when the game first starts for the first time, the RNG picks a number between the range. So I like to use the example of Ainsworth, Thunder Cash, dollar machine. The major starts at 9,000, must win by 10,000. So the RNG will pick a number completely at random. It's not weighted, completely at random between 9,000 and 10,000. It could be 9,261 and 45 cents. It could be 9,750 and 86 cents. It could be that either one of those, right? It's just gonna pick it at random. As that progressive continues to grow, because every single time that you wager on it, it increases by a certain amount. And if it passes whatever that one is that the RNG picked, you are awarded the progressive, and then it resets and does that thing all over again, okay? That's how those work. Now let's talk about all the other progressives that you see on the floor. These are your fire links, your dragon links, lightning links, huff and puff. I mean, they are all over the place now. You have your major, your grand, those kind of progressives. Guys, those do not have a must win by component. They have a ceiling, but they do not have a must win by component. So if you go into the game rules, a lot of times it will actually tell you the ceiling. Like the most it can be is 99,999 and 99 cents, okay? If it got all the way up to that, it doesn't mean you're gonna be awarded that. And in fact, it continues to grow well beyond that point because it has to. It can't just get rid of it. We'll talk about that in just a second. But these are not must hit by components. So when you see one that is very high, it doesn't mean that your chances have dramatically increased to hit it, because it hasn't. On those games, on most normal progressives, every single spin that you make is exactly the same odds of hitting those progressives. So try to remember that. Do not chase those because they are high and they're getting close to that ceiling amount. It tells you nothing, okay? And I understand a lot of you say, yeah, but it tells you it hasn't been won in a while. Well, that's true, but the odds are constant. It hasn't changed. It could literally hit the very next spin after it just got hit. The probability of it is exactly the same. It's not probable, but it can happen, right? All right, so let's talk about what happens when they're capped out. We hear this a lot on the Dragon Links and those kind of games. Whenever you see a major and it's at 1,000 and it's not growing anymore, that means it's reached its cap, but it's actually still growing behind the scenes, okay? The most you can win on that progressive is 1,000, is $1,000. It cannot give you 1,200. It only gets you 1,000. But it continues to grow secretly in the background because by law, progressives must be paid back to the players. The casino cannot just keep that money. They can't say anything over 1,000 we get to keep on our own. No. So how do they control that? So if you've ever seen this before, and I've seen it many times, but this is how it works, is that if it does go past 1,000, let's say it climbs secretly to 1,200, and you hit the progressive, you get the major ball, you will win $1,000, and then it will reset and then add that overage to the reset value. So it will add 200 to whatever it resets to, which I think is 500 in that case. So it will start at 700. Does that make sense? Hope I didn't talk too fast through that, but that's what's actually going on here. And while we're talking about progressives, another thing, guys, we've seen in the comments like, yeah, they wait till it gets really high and then they take the machine out of service so they don't have to pay the progressive. By law, they have to transfer that progressive to another active machine. They can't just let it go away, okay? And so even if a progressive is very high, they will sometimes combine it with other machines. And you may see this sometimes when you're walking through a casino and you see a bunch of games and one of them just happens to have a gigantic progressive compared to the others. And that's most likely because they combined a machine that was taken out of service with that progressive. So that's usually why it's substantially higher than the others. But just think about that. That's what's going on with the progressives. Guys, do not chase progressives unless you are very much aware of the advantage play component of must hit by or must win by progressives. Do not chase the progressives. They are very difficult to hit. It's a lot of psychology, thinking that it's really high, that it's about to hit soon. It's a trick, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, bonus rounds, everybody's favorite, right? So there's basically 3 different types of bonus rounds. There's some edge cases out there, but let's talk about the main 3. And that is pick a progressive, free games, and then the hold and spin feature. So let's tackle each one of those separately. So the first one, pick a progressive. Dancing drums, let's use that as an example. Most of us have played dancing drums at some point. Why is it always the mini? Why is it when I pick the coins, it's always the mini? That's predetermined, guys. Like the moment that you hit that, it's predetermined. If you think that they could possibly have you pick from 10 coins at random, there would be grands going off all day long, and that would throw off the payback percentage. Remember we talked about control earlier. So the control aspect to this is that there's just, when the RNG is picking from something, it's just way more likely to pick the mini because there's just a bunch of, imagine a big fish bowl filled with ping pong balls and there's 100 of them in there. 90 of them are gonna be the mini, you know what I'm saying? So even though it's random, you don't know which one it's gonna pick. It's just more likely because of probability that it will pick the mini. So that's what's going on there. Most pick a progressive bonuses. In fact, I don't even know of any that aren't predetermined. They are predetermined. So keep that in mind. All right, let's talk about free spins bonus. Is this predetermined? Does it actually matter when I press the spin button to start the free spins that it's gonna make any difference? No, they're very much random. It is not predetermined. So let's take dancing drums too, where if you do get the free games, you get to pick how many lines you want, how many free games you want, or the stupid mystery bonus. Guys, never pick that one. It's stacked against your favor. What is actually going on there? Does it really matter which one I pick? Has it already determined what the end amount is? The answer is no, it hasn't. The free games will play out just like any other game. Now, what is different is the symbols that the RNG pick from often change during free games, especially games that have multipliers involved, because they basically have to change what the weights are for each of the symbols, all right? So the higher paying symbols, may show up a little bit less frequently during the bonus round of a free games bonus, right? Because especially like I said, if there's a multiplier involved, that's typically what they do to kind of keep the payouts a little bit more consistent and not wild, right? So, but you should know that the outcome has not been decided, right? Anytime you have free games that are spinning through, there's RNG stops just like any other individual spin. But like I said, what has changed is sometimes the symbols are a little bit different from what the RNG is picking from. All right, let's talk about everybody's favorite, and this is new for this video, the hold and spin feature. What is actually going on here? So I get the 6 balls, then I trigger the hold and spin. Why is it so hard to get that 15th ball for the grand? So here's a trick. It works on most games, although it depends on the manufacturer and all this. If you get into, let's use Firelink for example. If you initiate the hold and spin feature, there's going to be one square on there that's going to be mysteriously empty, and it's going to move around the board every single time you spin. So try to see this one, and you'll notice it real quick that you just don't see anything flashing through there whatsoever. Well, what is that exactly? So the way hold and spin features work is that each one of those squares is an actual reel. Okay, think of it like the reel strip I held up earlier in the video. Think about that. Each one of those squares is a separate reel. Now, a couple of those squares, especially one of them, there are 10,000, 100,000 different symbols on there for the RNG to pick from, but only one of them is the ball that you need for the grand. I don't know what the number is, I'm giving you an example. Where all the others, it may be a 1 in 4 chance of landing a ball, especially the early ones. Like the early ones, more likely the RNG is going to pick it because of the probabilities of it picking something like that. But when it comes to those later ones, it's going to be difficult because the RNG, you just have to get really lucky on probabilities. If it's 1 out of 10,000, you have to roll that RNG that gives you that one number. Let's say it is the number 1. You would have to hit that for it to show up and give you the grand, right? So that's what's actually going on in the hold and spin feature. It's not predetermined. Every time you press the spin button to start the next spin, it's an RNG pool for each one of those squares. But like I said, one of them is going to be very, very empty. And you'll see it float around the board a little bit. It doesn't mean it's impossible to hit. It just means that that's the one that just happens to be the reel that has a lot of spots on it, and most of them are blanks. Does that make sense? All right, let's move on. All right, let's talk about the different kinds of classifications of slot machines out there. So the biggest two are Class 2 and Class 3. So Class 2 are your bingo style games, and you mostly see these in tribal casinos. Oklahoma is a hotbed for this, but they are scattered out in other places as well. If you see a bingo card or a bingo, you hear the bells, you know what I'm talking about. If you've ever been to a Class 2 facility, you know this. If you see the bingo card, things like that, that is Class 2 gaming. It appears to be a slot machine, but what you're actually doing is playing a very complicated and complex game of bingo. And we have some other videos that we'll link to in case you want to check that out in the description below about how those actually work. But those are typically in tribal casinos. Main reason is startup costs are very low. So a lot of tribes don't have a lot of money to put in Vegas style machines, which are the Class 3. We'll talk about that in a second. So they start out with the bingo style, a little bit easier to implement. The machines are cheaper, licensing is cheaper, it's quicker to get approved, things like that. But a lot of them over time like to convert to Class 3 or have a mix. So some of the bigger ones like Choctaw Durant and WinStar in Oklahoma, they have a mix of both Class 2 and Class 3. You see bingo patterns anywhere on the machine, on the bet panel, in the game rules, or on the screen itself, you're playing a Class 2 game. But if you don't see that anywhere, they can't hide it. If you don't see that anywhere, you're playing a Class 3. So what is Class 3? That's the ones you guys are most familiar with. What you see behind me, what is in all the Vegas casinos, you know, Atlantic City and all that, it's your typical slot machine. And these are standalone. They are not connected to a server to determine outcomes. That's what Class 2 is. Class 3 is you versus the RNG of that machine, and that's it, okay? Now there's some other ones out there. There's video lottery terminals, VLTs, real big in Washington State. We don't have a whole lot of information on there, so I can't really tell you that right now. We're going to be seeking out some information here at G2E coming up soon. But you also have HHR, historical horse racing. Okay, so even though you have all these different versions, VLTs, HHR, bingo, and all this kind of stuff, the concept is the same, but what is happening is just a different way of generating randomness. So we talked about very early in this video, the RNG. We're talking about Class 3 machines, you versus the machine. But these other ones, these other classes like class 2 and VLT and HHR, they're just generating randomness in a different way due to state restrictions and things like that, okay? So historic horse racing, it relies on historical horse racing events to generate randomness. VLTs is virtual lottery terminals. They're generating lottery numbers essentially. So they're just different ways of generating randomness, but the point is still the same, to not have predictable outcomes. Make sense? All right, let's move on. All right, let's move on to one of my favorite topics, and that is the tricks, the psychological effects that slot machines have on you, the player, right? So if you've watched this entire video, and I hope you have learned how they are built, how the RNG works, how the payback percentage works, how the results are presented to you, and how they come to those outcomes. But there are some things that slot manufacturers do to try to convince you otherwise, that you do have control, you do have predictability, all of these things. First one I've got to mention is the perceived progression. The fireworks, the pigs, the fish bowls, the gems, the coins building up, all of this stuff is perceived progression. And what that means is it's just an illusion. And it's a psychological trick thinking you have a chance of hitting something because it's piled up. Even if you think, I know it's an illusion, but it does tell you how long it's been since it's hit the bonus. It doesn't matter. The probabilities of hitting those bonuses are constant. They do not change based on where the game is. They are constant. They remain the same. So guys, please, and these are listed in the game rules if you don't believe me, go into the game rules and look. It'll be a word salad. It won't make a lot of sense, but there will be something to the effect that the progression of gems is for illustration purposes only, or have no bearing on outcomes, things like that. It'll say something like that in the game rules. These are very prevalent everywhere, okay? Please do not fall for it. Do not chase because you see one that's really high. It's an illusion and they're trying to trick you, all right? That's probably the biggest one. Now, some of the other ones is the must-hit buys, okay? I've fallen a victim of this. It's so hard not to chase those because especially, let's say even if it's the minor, right? It has to hit by 500, you see a machine and it's at 460. It's really hard not to chase that because you think, wow, it has to hit by 500. It's really come a long way. It's like almost 70% there. That last 30% will cost you significantly more than whatever that value is. But it's hard because especially once you start playing it, then you feel invested. Instead of just playing it to try to get lucky, you start to feel, well, this is mine. I have to get this because I don't want to get off this machine and have some knucklehead come by and put a 20 in and win it on the first spin. I'm going to feel terrible. That's how they get you, man. It's a psychological effect to get you to keep playing those and falling for that chase. So we really urge, unless it's really, really close, guys, we really urge you to just ignore that. Don't fall victim to chasing. The pigs, the firecrackers, must hit by, all that kind of stuff, guys. Remember that slot machine manufacturers are trying to trick you as much as they possibly can by putting all these mechanics into the game that you're playing. But you got to be smarter than that, and you got to know to look for those things and understand nothing's predictable. Try to keep that in your mind. Nothing is predictable. And second, do not chase. Those are the two biggest things that you can learn from all the stuff that is coming your way at slot machines. And guys, it's only going to get worse. But we need to educate you so you understand what you're looking at and know that it doesn't matter. All right, let's wrap all this up. I know we talked about a lot of geeky stuff in this video, but now is the time where I'm going to tell you how to use all this information to your advantage. All right, so let's bring this all home. I hope you guys listen to the whole video because there's a lot of good stuff in there, because we need to set the foundation so you understand how everything works, how it's regulated, how there's a lot of protections in place, so that you get a better feeling and more confidence going in the casino that there's no monkey business going on. And I know a lot of you say, yeah, you're a slot tech, you're just telling us what they want to hear. No, that's not true at all. I do not currently work for a casino. I'm telling you how this stuff works, and you can go look it up yourself. I'm not making any of this stuff up. These are all very heavily regulated industries. They put a lot of time and effort into it to make sure everybody is on the up and up, all right? We put a lot of videos together on this channel where we talk in depth about a lot of the topics that we just covered in this one. So if you really want to learn more, please search our channel. We've got a lot of questions answered in there, okay? So let's wrap all this up. Okay, so listen, at the end of the day, you need to go to the casino and play what you enjoy. It is a form of entertainment with the chance of walking out with some cash, right? It's never a guarantee, never a guarantee. We will never tell you that on this channel, that there is a guaranteed way to win more at slots. The only real guaranteed way to win at slots is to know when to stop playing and walk out the damn door. But there's nothing you can do. You can't trick the machine. You can't test the machine. You can't play it a little while and say, yeah, this is a losing machine. It's on the tape. You can't do that. That's not possible, right? It's all randomized and unpredictable for future outcomes. So you cannot do anything to try to gain an edge. And I know we all want to do that, right? You probably found this video because you want to learn how to get an edge on playing slot machines. I'm telling you right now, there's no way to do it. Except for very, very specific advantage play rules, the majority of slot machines that are out there, you're going to lose the longer you play. But if you focus on leaving with your winnings, knowing when to stop, knowing when to cash out of the slot machine and walk out the door, then you can start to turn things around a little bit. But please understand, there is no way to guarantee a win if you play slot machines. It's the worst game to play in the casino, with a few exceptions like Keno. Sorry, Keno players. With a few exceptions, it is the worst game that you can play, but it's there for mostly entertainment. And you never know. Maybe you'll have a lucky day, but most of the time you won't. You just got to be happy with that and treat it as such. So the last thing I want to mention is also be aware of the tricks. We just talked about those, but these are the things that really throw people for a loop and get them to start making bad decisions. Please remember, machines are not purposely programmed to be hot or cold. If you're on a machine that is hitting, it does not tell you anything. It does not tell you that it is in a hot state and you better stay on it. Okay, that is a fool's errand. You're going to get trapped eventually by thinking that, right? Same thing on a cold machine. You're on a cold machine, it's got to start turning around and paying soon. No, that is not how slot machines work. You're going to get in trouble with that too. And then finally, the perceived progression crap, guys. Be careful with that. If you want to play those games, fine, but ignore all that stuff up there. Don't look at the firecrackers or the pigs or the fish bowls filling up. Don't look at any of that stuff because it's not telling you anything. And all it's going to do is try to play a psychological trick with you. So, guys, I hope you learned something in this video. Please share this. If you know anybody that's very curious about how slots work, or you have somebody that thinks everything's hot and cold, send them this video. Maybe it'll open their mind that there is something else going on here. And we do back everything up. I'm going to put some links in the description below that you can check out if you want to do some additional research on it. But guys, be safe out there. That's why we created this channel, is we want you to have a good time, but we want you to be fully aware of your surroundings and what is going on in front of you. All right? Gamble smart, gamble safe. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, guys.